Hello, I'm Maayan, and I'm the candidate for Vancouver False Creek, running for the BC Green Party in this election. I put out on my social media to see if there were questions that people wanted me to answer. I thought they would be fun questions, but actually a lot of these questions were really hard, and I had to look into them. So we're going to make a bit of a longer video today with some of my answers to the questions, and we probably won't get to them all today, so we might do some more in the future. So here's the first question from Brent. What policies does the BC Green Party hold in relation to organized labor? Well, the BC Green Party doesn't have a lot of policies in place right now around that, but I will tell you what I think about it. We know that organized labor has been really important in getting basic workers' rights that we now take for granted. But my opinion is that we need to enshrine a lot of the workers' rights that labor unions have worked hard to achieve into standard worker rights for everybody. And I learned a bit more about this through a conversation with my friend Frank Fleming. And so basically what he was sharing with me is that minimum wage needs to be a living wage. We don't need exceptions in the labor code for agricultural workers and construction workers. And we need to set a baseline in the labor codes so that the same benefits that are currently enjoyed by unionized laborers can be enshrined for everybody. So that means everyone deserves paid coffee breaks, an actual living wage, paid sick days, vacation, or even a 4-day work week. I think making it easier to unionize is a good idea, and it's one that I support. But it's better not to make stressed out and overworked people need to take on even more labor in order to unionize. So updating the labor codes is really the answer, not necessarily forcing people to unionize. And I also wanted to make a note that some unions, even though they've done so much for workers' rights, and that's extremely important, some unions have become a regressive force in society. For example, there's private sector unions in the oil and gas industry or other industries that want to just hold on and create jobs in those familiar industries. And we know we have to transition out of those industries. Obviously, the people that work in those jobs deserve to make a living, and transition to renewable energy and a sustainable economy with a universal living wage could provide that. And I'll talk more about that in another question. But large unions in specific industries can't be allowed to drive the public agenda, just as corporate interests should not. Okay, next question, also from Brent. What policies does the BC Green Party hold in relation to the influence of corporate power and money in politics? So, in the last government, the BC Greens did work with the previous government to reform the donation laws, to have a more modest limit on individual and corporate donations in elections. But we know that that doesn't mean that corporations still don't have way deeper ties to the government. And we've witnessed that with the BC government's cash handouts and tax breaks to the fracking and LNG industry with their biggest partner, Royal Dutch Shell. So we know that those ties go deeper than just election donations. To transition to a sustainable economy quickly, governments will need to work with companies and even make direct investments in projects that companies are managing and also investing in. But ideally, I think that those should be not just in centralized multinational corporations, but in local companies that are more ethical and accountable to the communities they're actually based in. And transparency and accountability is the key in these relationships. It's not that the corporate sector is all bad, it's that the government needs to work with those companies and corporations in accountable, transparent ways, and towards goals that are actually socially beneficial, instead of just enriching the oligarch class. And Lausanne asks, what about a universal basic income for all? And again, I consulted with Frank Fleming about this, who knows a lot more about the nuances of it than I did. And he basically helped me understand that there's a few different versions of this that people can choose from. There's the idea of a universal basic income, or UBI, and that's basically a flat amount of money that's mailed to everybody every month, regardless of income, and it's taxable income. So that means for wealthier people, the majority of that money is clawed back in taxes anyways. So that's the UBI. Guaranteed basic income, or GBI, would only be mailed out to people with lower incomes, and it tops up their income to get them above the poverty line. And that's the GBI, or guaranteed basic income. Both of them have certain problems with them. The guaranteed basic income allows employers to set wages that are low, knowing that they'll be able to hire people anyways, because wages won't be as big of a factor. So everybody can get a living wage, but rich employers can still benefit from that. Universal basic income can be really expensive because you're mailing out checks to every Canadian, and that's a huge amount of money. Even if the intention is to take most of it back in taxes, it's not the most efficient way to do that. And according to Frank, who I really trust on this issue, setting a high minimum wage that's actually a living income together with a guaranteed basic income is probably the best way to go forward. So that basically prevents exploitation of workers, while it also provides everybody on welfare and disability, or that can't work at the moment, with enough money to properly live and to improve their conditions. And it also leads to more job creation because people that don't come from wealth can have a bit of security in taking entrepreneurial risks and starting new projects. Okay, Lausanne asks about decriminalizing people who have addictions. Well, this is really important, and the Green Party supports Dr. Bonnie Henry's report from last year, from April 2019, and where she basically outlines how decriminalizing people who use drugs and creating a safe supply for drugs would turn the tide on the overdose crisis. And unfortunately, the province, the NDP government, still hasn't fully implemented those recommendations, and it needs to. We have to remember that more people have died of drug overdoses than of COVID in BC, and it's a crisis, and it has to be addressed through evidence-based approaches, not by ridiculous law and order style policies that we know do not work. And decriminalization and a safe supply of drugs also eliminates the financial incentive for trafficking in illegal drugs, and we know that that's the source of a lot of the violent crime in this province. So basically, people need to be supported to heal from addiction, not punished, and this is a life and death situation for a lot of people. Okay, Lausanne is also asking about the Wet'suwet'en Nation and Coastal GasLink. Well, the BC Greens are against both the CGL and TMX pipelines. When they were in opposition, NDP MLAs were also opposed to those things, but they have changed their mind now. So this is a quote from Michelle Mungle, who's now an NDP cabinet minister. And she said that developing the LNG industry is a, quote, sellout of this province, a sellout of this future. And the current environment minister, George Heyman, said, quote, we're creating significant environmental catastrophe, significant health issues, and we're going to cost the economy of this province, this nation, and the world billions of unnecessary dollars, end quote. So those are ministers in the NDP government talking about the LNG industry when they were in opposition, which they now are investing billions in. The Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment have reported extensively about the health problems in northeastern BC because of all the fracking. The health implications are scary, and it isn't even well understood, and that's without even talking about the greenhouse gas emissions being burned from the stuff. Regarding rights and title to the land and the Wet'suwet'en Nation, that's mostly a federal jurisdiction issue. But I think we've all seen, and it's become very clear, that only working with the Indian Act chief and council system is problematic. And we all know that First Nations have their own systems of governance, and Canada and British Columbia need to find ways of recognizing and working with hereditary chiefs and traditional forms of governance, because large portions of these nations don't agree with the decisions of the Indian Act governance, and they are asserting rights and title over a territory that's never been ceded. And doing that is part of living up to our commitments under the UN DRIP legislation in BC. So Jean-Michel is asking about education after years of chronic underfunding. So this platform plank around education hasn't been announced yet, but there has been an announcement from this Tuesday about early childhood education, so I'll talk about that a bit. So Sonia Firstenow just announced that the BC Greens are committed to bringing early childhood education under the Ministry of Education and boosting funding for up to 25 hours of free childcare a week for 3 and 4-year-olds. And this is really critical for young families and women. And the plan is more comprehensive, but you can refer to her announcement. The broader education platform, like I said, hasn't been announced yet, but broadly, we support a huge funding increase to education to increase access, and we've in the past called for binding arbitration with the BCTF. I asked my colleague Françoise Renaud, who is running in Vancouver Fraserview as a candidate for the BC Greens, and she is a teacher, what she thinks. And she says she supports enough specialist teachers to meet demand, smaller class sizes, and additional student supports, as well as school-level access to community services, pre-K added to the K-12 systems. As I mentioned, that is in the platform, and safe schools for every neighborhood. So I defer to Françoise, and I know that so many teachers work within this system where they're integrating students with special needs into their classrooms, which is great, but they need additional supports to be able to do that successfully. Susan is asking, won't the economy tank under Green leadership? And also from Sarah, a similar question. How is the Green Party going to create jobs? So I think we need to move to a different idea about what a good economy means. And the BC Green Party does have this language in its 2017 platform. We want an economy that's based on people's health and well-being, not just on artificial metrics like GDP growth. So humans have the best well-being when they have meaningful relationships, when they can connect to family and community, when they can be outside in nature, and when they aren't stressed out about just surviving. So we can have an economy where we're living within planetary boundaries and conserving resources, but still thriving and having really meaningful lives that reward and speak to our values. So that does mean saying goodbye to certain concepts of what a good economy means. For instance, high consumer spending and growth in extractive industries. Those are traditional markers of a good economy, and they shouldn't be. And it also means that certain types of jobs won't exist in the future. And that's not pleasant to hear for people that have those jobs right now. But as ever, that's the reality of economic transition, and it can be difficult. There's some winners and there's some losers. And it's our responsibility to make sure that everybody has their basic needs met and covered and can live in dignity. And as I spoke about with the universal basic income question. But basically, I mean, we have to remember in nature, things that constantly grow are called cancer, and they eventually kill the body. But somehow this is normal in our economic system. Luckily, the thing is that the economic changes that we need to make to heal the ecosystem and stop global warming are the same ones that can also be used to have more evidence-based ideas of what a healthy economy that actually serves our well-being looks like. We need that rather than just an economy that serves the hungry ghosts of the billionaire class. Rachel asks, what's the Green program for public transportation? Thanks, Mom. Well, this platform plank hasn't been announced yet, but this is from the 2017 platform. There's a commitment to adding funding to address frequency of service and affordable fares, leveraging federal funding and matching it for capital expenditures and public infrastructure, and working with local governments to address funding and regional transportation infrastructure, as well as looking at ways to fund that through road pricing, mobility pricing, congestion pricing, etc. So we need to find innovative ways that balance accessibility with fares and pricing of the roads so that we can move towards public transportation in ways that actually serve the community. And this is an official party policy, but I consulted with several of my fellow candidates, and we all think the idea of making it easier for people with disabilities to get access to the BC Bus Pass program is a good idea, and that came from Stephanie Hendy, who's the candidate in Vancouver Langara, and also extending that to low-income earners as well, if that's successful. So investing in public transit and designing communities that can use that capacity is really central, and it should be in every community. From Ian, if you form another minority government, what are the top issues that you'll push for? Well, I can answer this for myself. I personally would push, first things first, for a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice. We need to supplement our democracies with deliberative democracy processes like citizens' assemblies, because we've seen that elected democracies are not capable of enacting long-term policies on the climate and ecological crisis. So we need citizens' assemblies that can deliberate and make recommendations and decisions to create strong mandates for transformation for governments to follow through on, because otherwise they are just too influenced by short-term thinking and the different corporations and lobby groups and money that are pulling them away from making the right decisions for our future. So that would be my first priority. I also support a citizens' assembly on electoral reform so that we can again stop having these ridiculous debates about vote splitting and have a more representative elected democracy as well. The BC Green Party has already committed to pushing to stop oil and gas subsidies and has voted against that repeatedly. We're also calling for a halt to construction on Site C, and while it's being reassessed, and there's other promises about reforming the long-term care sector and education, etc., as Sonia has already announced in her platform planks. I was blown away by the depth and quality of the questions that I got, but I shouldn't be, because these are a bunch of people that are really thoughtful, and I had to look into some of these things. I really want to thank my fellow candidates and members of the Green Party that have helped pull together resources for a lot of these questions, because I don't know everything off the top of my head, and I'm learning a lot as I go along. So thank you, and hopefully we'll be able to do another one of these in a little while to answer some more. Bye.